Hi, it's Mark Bossert. I'm here with Bernie Pollock of Pollock Automotive in Vancouver, and we're here talking the truth about cars. How are you doing this morning, Bernie?
Doing well.
So we've introduced this new podcast with the idea that we're in the biggest, fastest, most craziest changes in the automotive industry in its history, basically. And so what's going on with new cars these days, Bernie?
Well, I mean, the biggest trend with new cars, of course, is electric. Every manufacturer's got models introduced. There's government legislation on the books in a number of cities saying you can't have a gasoline-powered or diesel internal combustion engine vehicle in the city in a certain time frame. There's a lot. And as I said, I mean, every manufacturer's got electric cars on the books. There's some pretty exciting technology around that. So it seems like electric car technology is the new big thing. But you've done a little research, Mark, and it looks like it's actually not. It actually goes way back, actually almost predating the internal combustion engine car. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, in fact, probably the first automobiles were electric. Electricity was sort of in its infancy in 1830, 40 range, where batteries were first introduced. I think electricity was used with, the steam trains were being developed and improved around that same time. And electric trains were sort of the beginning of the use of electric powered vehicles. But the first production electric car was introduced in London in 1884. It had a high capacity rechargeable battery, believe it or not, in 1884.
That's amazing. That's like 120 years ago.
40 years ago, I think.
Or is it? Wow. Okay.
So it's an awfully long time ago, and what people don't realize is that interest in electric cars was actually quite high in the 1890s and 1900s. They didn't stink and were easier to actually operate than gasoline cars. They didn't have to have gear changes, and the biggest one really was the crank start, which was a big thing with, old cars in the 1904, 5, 6. You had to have a crank on the front of the car and start the vehicle. And by the 1910s, 1912, they're about 40% of all the cars on the road in the United States. 40%, which is pretty amazing.
That's incredible. That's something I didn't know. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, it is. So, and steam cars were also a big thing, bigger than gasoline cars. But there was also some countervailing forces at work at the same time. So around 1908, that was when Ford got going with the production line, which started to change economies of scale for making electric cars. Kind of along with that, electric starters came along. Interesting, kind of combining there of electric being used to start an internal combustion engine car. And mufflers was another new invention, actually in 1904, 1905.
That would have made the internal combustion engine vehicle a lot more palatable. I mean, imagine a world of, I often think about that, of cars driving around with no mufflers. It would just be,
Well, I happen to hear them once in a while around here, with there being such a big drag racing community around this where I live. It's not fun.
Yeah, it's too loud.
As they improved roads, basically, and electric starters, and they started to use the production line to decrease the price of gasoline cars. Electric cars, with their limited range, battery technology, of course, was in its complete infancy. They didn't have the physics understanding or the material technology that we have today. So they weren't able to improve batteries really quickly, and gasoline cars were improving pretty quickly. So as people had the ability to go a lot further, rather than just being in an in-town car, which is what mostly automotive vehicles were at the beginning of the century, as they got more and more roads connecting different cities, gasoline cars just became better. But then the big one for me was that by 1912, equivalent electric car was twice the cost of a gasoline car. And that really, people vote with their pocketbook. That was pretty much the end of the electric car at that time. As we move along through World War II, there was tremendous fuel shortages because of the war, affecting many, many countries. And there was a lot more experimentation around that time during the war to use electric vehicles. And there'd been not a lot of money or energy put into improving battery technology. And so it was still an expensive undertaking with vehicles without a lot of range. But then by the 1990s, we had an interesting thing, big jump, I know. There was some more little things like in 1960, the Renault Dauphine was converted into an electric car by another company in Europe. And they sold a few thousand of them. Again, limited range and limited speed, 60 miles an hour top speed kind of thing.
And probably expensive too, compared to the internal combustion model of that car too, since
they were pretty comparable, maybe slightly more expensive, but just very limited in terms of range and performance, etc. Yeah. Not that the Dauphine was ever a speed demon or anything.
No.
By the 90s, we jump. This kind of a big jump, another 40 years forward, and the California Air Resources Board legislated that there had to be very fuel efficient cars on the road in California. They have tremendous problems with pollution, and a lot of cars. It was built as a car dependent transportation system throughout Southern California for sure. And they said, we got to fix this. And so the government mandated that there had to be zero emission vehicles produced by the manufacturers who wanted to sell cars in California, as well as really lower emission vehicles. Yeah. So it's a big list of companies that actually had electric vehicles in production in California. And maybe I don't know if you've ever seen any of these, but there was like Chrysler had an electric van, the Ford Ranger, there was an EV pickup, the GM EV1, which is this bizarre looking space machine. They had an S10 EV pickup, which is their kind of mid-sized pickup truck that was all electric. Honda had a small hatchback that was electric. Nissan had a mini wagon that was electric. Toyota had a RAV4 that was an all-electric vehicle. You ever seen any of those?
No, never seen them. I didn't, with the exception of the EV1, which is, of course, is famous for that movie, Who Killed the Electric Car. I mean, I'd never heard of any of those. I've never seen them. I mean, I'm sure they all just stayed in California. There's probably the odd one in a museum, if anywhere left anymore. But yeah, I never even heard those existed. I mean, there's nothing in any of my repair information about them. They're very, very one-off and very limited market vehicles.
Well, they were limited to California. Basically, they were legislated into existence. Yeah. The manufacturers, I guess, felt like they had, a gun put to their head to make these vehicles. And once there was a big lawsuit, a class action lawsuit to stop the Air Resources Board legislating that there had to be electric vehicles. I'm not sure of all the story that goes with that. It's probably pretty interesting. Anyways, the law changed. The manufacturers killed the vehicles, literally took most of them and destroyed them. Toyota being the one exception. They're actually still today supporting some of those RAV4 electric vehicles. They're still running in California. But most of them, like GM, the EV1, that vehicle was only sold as a lease, a closed-end lease that the cars went back to GM and they junked most of them. There's a few in museums, like you said, that they basically went into the museums and broke them so they wouldn't ever be operable again. GM did that. So I'm not sure what the thinking was behind that. It doesn't necessarily make any sense to me, but it was like there was a serious bias against ever using electric vehicles for some reason in that time frame.
Yeah.
Outside of the car industry, then we have around in the early 2000s or prior, slightly prior, perhaps, the Elon Musk gets unveils his massive plan to disrupt the entire automotive industry, and everybody kind of giggled behind their hand. What does this clown think he's doing? He came up with the Tesla Roadster in 2004, and it was based on the Lotus Elise platform. First electric car, had a 200-mile range, 130-mile-an-hour top speed. Tiny little thing, but it sold well enough that they were able to prove the concept and prove the whole idea of, using lithium-ion batteries, rechargeable in a vehicle. And then in 2012, so quite a jump, 8 years later, they came out with the Tesla S model. I'm sure you've seen those and heard about them. The 2013 version was actually voted as the best car that's been produced in the last 70 years of car production. One magazine mentioned that, Car Magazine, because of the massive changes. Had big range, very fast, very comfortable car. I've test driven a couple. I know you've test driven them. They're very nice cars.
Yeah. The only complaint about them, for the amount of money you spend on them, you could buy a nicer Mercedes, or, you could get fancier features. But I mean, when you look at what the car is offering for the money with the electric drivetrain, and, it's a damn good car. It's amazing.
So that's a brief history, which is pretty amazing. And, what we're seeing is that, the path to 1 million electric vehicles. I mean, we've missed a lot of vehicles. There's the Nissan Leaf, there's on and on. I mean, basically at this point, all manufacturers in the world are either partnering or have on the books, or are on their own coming up with their own electric vehicles. We've got Audi and Jaguar and Mercedes-Benz and Nissan and on and on and on and on. All have, and Chevrolet, and they all have electric vehicles for sale right now or coming very soon. Porsche's Taycan comes next year.
Yeah. So
electric vehicles are a massive thing. We're going to go through what each manufacturer. There are new manufacturers. There's actually the place that has the most electric vehicles for sale or purchased on the road is in China, where they desperately need it because of the air pollution being such a massive problem. They're putting billions and billions and billions of dollars into making electric vehicles. There's actually a partnership between a company that I think is called Dongfeng and Nissan, where they actually have the first electric pickup for sale in the year 2020. But right now for $18,900 US, which is pretty amazing price, and it's a nice looking vehicle.
It's a very nice looking truck. It's a good looking truck for sure.
So, but it will only be in China. We're going to go through all these manufacturers and talk about the vehicles. We're going to pull out all the information we can find about what's coming, all the different manufacturers from Rivian to Lucid to on all of them. Yeah. Byton. There's some pretty amazing technology and trucks coming, and vehicles and cars and supercars as well. 2,000 horsepower electric vehicles that'll be faster than anything that's ever been produced by humankind.
Yeah, like we really need that kind of thing, but
well,
it's like, why do we climb mountains? Because they're there.
Exactly. They'll be so fast that you'll get to where you're going before you left.
Yeah.
So now some of the things that I've heard, some of the things that the talk around the water cooler. One of the things is that, electric cars don't have any power. You're really involved in this business. I know you're going through training, learning about electrics and hybrids in detail.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I mean, they've got tons of power. The thing that's neat about an electric motor is that it has instant torque. and a lot less moving parts. And, you know, to me, being in the automotive industry, I mean, a lot of the auto repair industry, a lot of the work we do is fixing oil leaks and coolant leaks and, you know, all those myriad of moving parts. I mean, there's I don't even know how many, you know, V8 engine, modern V8 engine with variable valve timing, all the amazing technology we put in to make that engine like really clean burning and powerful. And I mean, the performance is amazing with a modern internal combustion engine. You know, there's a lot of moving parts. And sometimes I drive down the highway and go, I just cannot believe all these parts that are, I mean, I used to think that 40 years ago when cars had, you know, didn't have overhead cams and variable valve timing and all those pieces. And now there's a whole bunch more pieces, and they're just all moving, and, you know, it's like a symphony playing an amazing orchestra. But the thing about electric motors, it's just a one piece shaft that spins, you know, with electricity applied to certain parts, you know, and that's what makes it work. And the thing with electric motors is that they've got immediate instant torque. So if anyone thinks, oh, those things don't have a lot of power, just look at the specs of a Tesla, like a Model S Tesla. So that's an expensive car. It's a high end car, but it's, you know, it's 0 to 60 spec, 2.5 seconds in ludicrous mode. I mean, I don't even know how many gasoline powered hot rods, you know, will even do that. I mean, they don't do that because they can't even keep the tires on the ground. But, you know, there are some all-wheel drive, you know, gasoline powered sports cars that'll probably come close or do the same thing. But this is a, you know, simple motor. It's easy. Even a Nissan Leaf 0 to 60, 7.5 seconds. That's a base model economy. They're not cheap, you know, because of the electric motor, but that's a base model economy car. And that's like, I mean, that spec is faster than a lot of other, you know, again, performance cars of the past. So top speed on the Tesla too, 155 miles an hour. Although apparently they say they can actually tweak them up to 162. It's only limited by software. But then there is, of course, a physical limit to how fast it can go. And as you mentioned to me, Mark, earlier, you know, the Teslas are really fast up to about 120 miles an hour, and then they start slowing. You know, then they don't have quite the oomph. But, you know, it'll be exciting for drag racing, you know, with electric, you know, an electric dragster. I mean, it will miss the thumping sound of the engine and that raw fuel being blown out. But, you know, there'd be this silent vehicle just blasting down the track faster than what we've got now.
Well, what about, you know, I know in terms of power, torque is really the king. So like diesel locomotives, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, like a diesel train locomotive, for instance, it's actually driven by an electric motor. So the diesel engine is just there to generate the electricity to drive the motor. So again, I mean, they've refined that technology. A diesel locomotive has been around for, I mean, they started using them back in, I think, 1920s or something, somewhere around there. Back when steam was really popular. Now I just divert off a little bit here, just talking about kind of the revolution with, you know, changing from electric cars to gas. I mean, you know, back in the 1920s, you know, steam just ruled the rails. The only place they had electric locomotives were in some cities where the pollution, of course, from the locomotives was too much. So they legislated having electric locomotives, which mostly had, you know, overhead wires. And the neat thing is, of course, you could just kind of you put a diesel. Anyways, with the diesel locomotive, different manufacturer made those. It's kind of interesting. That's the parallel. You talk about Elon Musk, you know, kind of disrupting the industry. You know, the main manufacturers, they did the electrics because they had to, and then they gave them up and kept working on their other technology. But, you know, Elon Musk he's new. He's not an automotive guy. He's just like, hey, let's just do this way and let's do it better. And diesel train locomotives kind of came along the same way. They're actually, General Motors was kind of a big company in that, and there was other companies, Baldwin, Alco. These are like big, huge steam locomotive manufacturers. Anyways, to shorten the story, I mean, as things evolved, that the big manufacturers couldn't quite get the grasp of making the locomotives. Like the diesel electric locomotive was a production piece, kind of like you know, the Model T Ford, where they could build one locomotive to, you couple them all together, and one locomotive would suit the needs of many railroads. Whereas the steam locomotive guys are into custom, like, let's just build this one locomotive type for you. And anyways,
Yeah,
they couldn't keep up.
it's hilly terrain or it's flat and
Yeah, so they just built the right, we'll build this massive locomotive, whereas GM, hey, just couple two together and you can still have two guys driving the locomotive. You don't need to have a whole extra crew. So I mean, bottom line, way less maintenance. It took like apparently 7 people to operate and maintain a steam locomotive, just to oil it and lube it and all those kind of things that need maintenance. It's like a modern internal combustion engine where you've got to get your oil changed, you've got to get your leaks fixed and all those kind of things. When we go into electric motored cars, it's sadly for the industry I'm in, there'll still be work, but it'll be a whole lot less. I mean, diesel electric locomotives still need work. They just need a whole lot less than a equivalent steam locomotive.
and so the drive in those massively powered train engines. But is that also true for ships? Isn't that true for ships?
Yeah, ships are the same too. I mean, it used to be that a ship had an engine like steam or diesel engine, and it would drive a shaft, and there'd be a gearbox and a propeller that'd be turned by. But for many years, a lot of those are driven. I don't know about freighters, but I know I've been on some cruise ships and kind of, this is neat technology. They're all, like all cruise ships, they're all electric driven motors. They have these cool little things. They're called azipods, and they basically sit in the back of underneath. It's like a rudder and propeller assembly, and it's electric driven. So the diesel engine just provides the electricity, the generating, to run the ship. Now I suppose you could just replace that with some massive batteries, but I don't know how big the batteries would need to be to run a cruise ship. Those things are like a city. You probably need more like an onboard nuclear power plant or something would be,
Well, and that's what a nuclear submarine basically is.
Yeah. And I mean, well, nuclear's beyond our scope, but I mean, of this conversation. But yeah, I mean, so electric drive is huge in so many other industries, and it's tried, it's true, it's tried, it's proven, it works, and it's reliable. I mean, railroad locomotives, from what I know, I mean, they don't, the electric motors last a long time, and and some of those things, they're pulling like massive amounts of weight and energy. So it's a good technology. It'll be interesting to see as cars become electrified what problems will happen, because something will occur. Either they won't build the motor beefy enough, or they'll try to go cheap, and so something will happen where things will occur, but it won't be there won't be a lot of it compared to like internal combustion engines. There's just way less moving parts.
Yeah, based on the history so far, what we're seeing is that battery technology is exponentially improving. So where people kind of have the difficulty and where the controversy possibly is that on the positive side of things, battery technology has consistently improved over the last 12 years, improved by 20% a year. And that means that the cost has gone down 20% and the efficiency and amount of power storage provided is going up by 20% per year, every year, which is pretty insane growth in terms of how fast this is happening. So the projection based on that continuing is that by 2022, equivalent gas car, electric car is cheaper. And at that point, I think, well, what do you think?
Well, you know what I mean. By that point, to me, it's a no-brainer. It's like if I was faced with a choice, okay, $30,000 for a new electric car or $30,000 for a new gas car, to me, it's pretty much a no-brainer to buy the electric. I mean, there's still a couple of infrastructural issues I think that might, still a couple of things that might cause someone to buy a gasoline-powered car, like depending on where you live. If you're a long ways, if you're in the city, the electric kind of makes sense. But if you're doing like a lot of long trips, it might make more sense to get the gasoline car just because it's easier to fill it up and you can keep going. Whereas electric, it involves a little bit, it slows your trip down a little bit because you got to find charging stations, but that infrastructure keeps building. Like you say, the batteries are getting better. I mean, those charging stations, there's more and more of them. The technology is, again, it's exponentially changing. So,
yeah, and how fast the cars can be charged. I mean, this Tesla supercharger network is on its 3rd generation, which each time it takes less time to charge the vehicle up. But there's also, there's further improvements coming that will drastically change it. I mean, this is not speculation. Teslas will be 20% more efficient next year with the new ones, with the new battery packs and supercapacitor systems that they're going to be putting into the cars in the next couple of years. And that, it gets, you think they're fast now.
Yeah. And you know what I've always noticed about like any technology, what I've noticed about all technology, whatever it is, what I see it a lot in cars is the more we do it, we continually make improvements. So the cars we see now, who knows what they'll be like 10 years down the road, like with motors. I mean, the technology is amazing with electric motors, but what's going to happen when we just go, okay, we're making millions of these units. It's not like, electric cars now they're kind of the sideline, but when they become at the forefront, the cost will drop. The technology will keep increasing. Same with, like you said, same with batteries. When we keep making more and more of them, we'll find ways to make them better, cheaper. It's why, at one time an automobile was a luxury item that only the rich could afford, and now it's like, now they're still expensive, but much cheaper because of mass production, and it's made it. I've often noticed too, like in the high end, if you want to know what's going to be happening in the world of cars, just look at what the high end people are doing. Like you look at the Tesla's kind of a disruptor, but if you look at like what the Mercedes models feature, to me, that's always like 10 years down the road. We'll probably be even faster, as things speed up. But if you look 10 years down what a modern Mercedes has for technology, just look 10 years down the road and everyone will have it, even in the cheapest cars, because they can afford to put that in the high end luxury bracket.
Yeah, now and then later it'll be in the cheap cars. Yeah. So we're going to talk about all these things. There's definitely considerations. We're going to dig into that over this series, the next 8 or 10 podcasts. So we're going to talk about what we think is going to happen with autonomous cars, the goods and bads of that, and how fast that's going to take place, because that changes everything. Electric cars are going to last a lot longer. The typical lifespan is looking like it might be as long as 1 million miles of use, or 1.6 million kilometers before the vehicle's worn out, where a normal gas engine car does not regularly do that.
No, there are some around that will, and you can make it do it if you have the right car. But there's a Volvo with over 2 million on it. It's been going.
Yeah, and probably been rebuilt a few times to be able to do it, which is great. I mean, that's in terms of resources, that's probably a great way to do it. But I think in this time of massive change, we're going to see. We're going to have to talk about all kinds of things. There's disruption in terms of jobs. There's disruption in terms of taxes. There's disruption in terms of energy production. Where are we going to get this energy from? How are we going to get it to people and put it in their cars? And we want to talk about all that stuff, as well as digging down into the vehicles, because we love cars.
So, exciting times.
Stay tuned. Lots happening right now. It's an exciting, very exciting time.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, just stay tuned. We got lots of neat stuff to talk about.
Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. We're going to talk some more about what's coming.